Well, so some names we choose, but others are chosen for us. We have no choice, for example, in the names that our parents gave us, but when we in turn become parents, we choose the names of our children. But one name over which one has no or perhaps little choice is how our grandchildren choose to address us. Lindy and my grandchildren chose to call us Bobby and Zadie. And I must say that at the time, it came as a terrible shock. Surely Bobby and Zadie were reserved for people who are much, much older than us. But that's what they chose, and I guess that is what has stuck for all of our grandchildren. So this last week, I had the very great privilege to officiate in Israel at the chuppah of our oldest grandchild and the first of our grandchildren to get married, which was, of course, a rite of passage both in his life and in Lindy's and mine as well. And it's prompted me to reflect on the role of a Bobba and a Zadie. So forgive me if we get a little personal. As it happens, the first person to be called Zayda in the Torah is Jacob. Because although Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are known primarily as the Avot, as the fathers, the patriarchs of our nation, and I must say that when I first heard about the four forefathers, I became very confused because I only knew of three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I kept wondering what happened to the fourth father. But at any rate, in regard to Jacob, in addition to being called Yaakov Avinu, our father Jacob, in several places in the Midrash, Jacob is referred to as Yisrael Sabah. And Sabah is the Hebrew for grandfather. In other words, he was called Zayda Yisrael. And perhaps the reason for that is because Jacob was the first man to actually raise Jewish grandchildren. Abraham, according to our tradition, passed away on the day of his grandson Esav's bar mitzvah. Isaac never saw his grandchildren until it was too late to participate or to partake in their upbringing, because Jacob had married and lived in Haran for 20 years before he came back to his father. So only Jacob had all his children and grandchildren living with him, and even Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph's children who were born in Egypt, grew up in their father's lap when Jacob moved to Egypt in his later years. So I once heard Elie Wiesel of blessed memory describe the relationship between a grandparent and a grandchild like an arc flash in electricity, in which the electrical charge arcs across a gap. And he said, similarly, the grandparent-grandchild relationship is as if the electrical current passes over the intermediate generation, creating a special bond between grandparent and grandchild in a way that is quite different to the relationship between a parent and a child. And the impact of this relationship is told in a rather amazing midrash in our Parsha V'Yetzeh, the Parsha of this week. The Torah describes the meeting between Jacob and Rachel at the well. They became engaged on the spot. Jacob kissed Rachel, and then the Torah says he began to cry. Rashi gives two explanations as to why Jacob cried. And the second, quoting a midrash, is the one that's pertinent to our discussion. He cried because he had arrived empty-handed. He, of course, knew the story of how Rebekah, his mother, was greeted by Eliezer, Abraham's servant, and all the wonderful gifts that Abraham had sent for her. But now he, Jacob, although he came from a very wealthy family, had nothing to give his bride when he met her. No diamond rings, not even a simple gift. And the reason for this is because of an incident that occurred on the way. Because when Jacob escaped from Esau and began his journey to his uncle in Haran, fleeing from Esau because he had tricked him in the matter of the blessings from their father Isaac, and Esau was mad as a snake and threatened to kill Jacob. And so Esau sent his son Eliphaz to pursue Jacob and to kill him. And Eliphaz was young and quick and very easily caught up with Jacob. And when they met, Jacob implored Eliphaz not to kill him. And Eliphaz was in a quandary because he had his father's instructions to carry out. And you don't go against your father's word, especially if your dad happens to be Esau. So there was a terrible problem. How were they going to resolve this problem? Eliphaz did not really want to kill his uncle, and yet it seems he was forced to. So they came up with a cunning plan. The Talmud says that a poor person is as good as dead. So Jacob said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you all of my belongings, and I'll be left naked and penniless, but still alive. But as far as the Talmud is concerned, as good as dead. So when you go back home to your dad, you can tell him your brother is as good as dead. And that's what they did. But the big issue for the sages was this. What prevented Eliphaz from carrying out his father's instruction? Why was he prepared to go along with this ruse? And Rashi says that it was because Eliphaz had grown up in his Zayda Isaac's home, and his grandfather had a powerful influence on him. Even though Eliphaz was the son of Esau, for whom bloodshed was a way of life, the moral standards and the traditions that he saw in his grandfather Isaac's home were the ones that prevailed. He couldn't bring himself to carry out his father's instructions, and he begged his uncle to help him find a way out. So powerful was the influence of his Zayda in his grandfather's home. So in our world, standards of behavior are constantly shifting. Behavior that a generation ago would be unthinkable is commonplace today. Grandparents hold the torch of tradition precisely because they are a generation removed. They're uniquely able to pass on to their grandchildren what sometimes even the child's parent can't. So the message today is, if you are already in this very special club called the Grandparent Club, be aware of the power we have to influence our grandchildren. And if you're not a grandparent yet, start practicing now. It's too hard to start to learn how to make Kiddush on Friday night when you are already in your 70s. Best to learn now. A few years ago, there was a very popular Jewish song by the Megama Duet, and it was a song about grandparents, and its closing line was, "Who will be the Zaydis of our children, if not we?" Indeed. Shabbat Shalom.